Testing 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Phyllis, you got the kettle on? Go and get it yourself. Alright, shut the fuck up then. Sorry about them. This is, my neighbors. Always something going on around here.
So many answers we may never know. Too many questions, get on with the show. No time for the chorus, only this verse. It's Kubrick's universe.
Open the podcast doors, Hal.
It's Kubrick's Universe, the Stanley Kubrick podcast.
Anyway, all right. We think we're live.
What's the big mystery?
I have seen one or two things in my life, but never anything like this.
You know there is no way on Earth you're going to leave here tonight without taking me with you.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Kubrick's Universe. Thanks for tuning in once again. You just heard the new trailer that was recently created to promote the 20th anniversary re-release of Eyes Wide Shut by Park Circus. This new release is going to be screened in select cinemas in the UK and Ireland and also across Europe through December 2019. Our next guest, Matt Wells, is a filmmaker and in-house producer at Park Circus, where he makes documentaries about some of the many films represented by the company. His forthcoming film will be screened at these showings before Eyes Wide Shut as part of the 20th anniversary theatrical run. Here is the trailer for his latest short film, Never Just a Dream, Stanley Kubrick and Eyes Wide Shut. And now here's the part where it says play trailer, as in that would be your cue for Mr. Stephen Rigg to, hence, play trailer.
It was a Sunday morning, March 7th, 1999, and my mother phoned me and said, Daddy's dead.
News just in, we've just heard that the film director Stanley Kubrick has died at the age of 70.
He just finished what was to be his last film, Eyes Wide Shut, which took 5 years to make.
The difficulty with Eyes Wide Shut is that everybody in the audience is an expert on sexual fantasy and jealousy. He just wasn't quite sure how can he put this on the screen. It's the most difficult film he did in his life. No question about it. It took also forever to do it. It took a long time.
He thought that it was his best film, and he was very, very proud of it.
This is Matt's third short documentary on the work of Stanley Kubrick, after Work and Play, a short film about The Shining, and Stanley Kubrick Considers the Bomb about Dr. Strangelove, both of which screened in cinemas internationally as part of the re-release of those films, respectively, in 2017 and 2019. But in the meantime, it's my pleasure to welcome back once again, Matt Wells. How you doing, Matt?
I am good, thank you.
Great. So let's get right into it. I want to ask, how did your film short end up coming about?
It's the third that I've done on Kubrick and his work, and it's one that, when I was filming way back a few years ago now, I filmed an interview with Catherine Kubrick, Kubrick's daughter, about The Shining, for a short film about The Shining. Mm-hmm. And we got off topic and got to talking about Eyes Wide Shut, and we were talking a bit about her sort of experiences of the film, which are obviously very very emotional for her. And it was, something that I thought from that point that I think it would be good to revisit, because there's a sort of part of the story there that, if I'm right, the biographies don't get to. Have I got that right? They both published before that film came out, so neither of them cover that part of the story. But it felt like, in a sort of important kind of closing chapters to Kubrick's life and work.
Mm. So it was during a conversation with Katharina that you had the idea for Never Just a Dream?
Yeah, well, I think, I'm fascinated by what's going on personally in filmmaking, because there's the technical side and the creative side and all of that, but I'm very interested in what the lives are like of the people who are involved in these things. And with Eyes Wide Shut, that's particularly interesting, I think, because Kubrick had such a close-knit inner circle who he worked with on so many of his films, people who were sort of family members or had been with him for decades. And with Eyes Wide Shut, within days of showing the finished edit to Warner's executives and Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, and he passed away very suddenly of a heart attack, which, can't have been easy, but is an interesting that that inner circle found themselves in quite an unusual situation with the movie.
Well, in a way, of course, we know that he's described it as his most personal film, and of course, Katharina has mentioned that many times over, that he felt it was his most personal film. So your examination of the personal aspects that went into the filmmaking certainly bring to bear a unique perspective on Eyes Wide Shut as his final film.
Yeah, it's an interesting one in his filmography. It's a very intimate movie, in a way that his others aren't, I don't think. I'm trying to think, is that true?
Yeah, I would say
true.
so.
It's not a big philosophical idea or argument behind it. It's sort of much more personal. The domestic setting. It's really about a couple. It's small by comparison to artificial intelligence or all these kind of big ideas that you get in so many of his other films. So it's fascinating in that sense. It's interesting, and I wonder what sort of filmmaking he would have gone on to do had he lived, because it is different from his others in that sense. But it's also I think also when people talk about it being his most personal film, it's something that he had wanted to make since the 50s. There's a bit of debate as to when he first came across the source material, Traumnovelle, the Schnitzler novella that it's based on. But, we know it was way back. And talking to, people like Tony Fruin, who worked with him on the sort of literary side of his work, it was always a question of how do you make it? It's not trying to kind of figure it out for decades before he finally makes it, which is also, when people wrestle with something for that long, you've got to wonder what holds the fascination for them.
Yeah, and well, would you venture a guess as to what you think Kubrick's personal fascination was with the subject? Or with the source material?
Well, I'll what people have said to me is, on the one hand, it's just something very human and very relatable about jealousy and fantasy, which is just, is a part of life and interested him, as I understand it, in that sense. In terms of why it took so long, had he figured it out and made it in, the 60s, say, would he have come back to the theme later on? I wonder, I don't know. But as I understand it, there was, on the one hand, there was a sort of, a problem of how do you make it work on screen? How do you make it work as a movie? Updating it, setting it in New York, all these sort of decisions that were made in the writing of the thing. But then I think, speaking to Catherine in particular, she talks about him and Christiana, his wife, feeling that he and they weren't ready at that stage to tackle that kind of subject matter, which is interesting as well, isn't it? It's sort of that self-awareness to say that this is more difficult than I'm capable of getting to grips with at this stage. I need, there's a sense talking to Katerina that he needed, more years under his belt in order to get it right.
It is an interesting take on the material itself, that it would require the eye of a more seasoned husband, a man more comfortable in his years than if he were to have made it back when he and Christiana were a young couple, full of love and the world before them, etc. Because it does seem the couples, I'm just basing this on experiences I know of in real life, that the couples that go the distance, shall we say, they're through those difficult struggles that do occur in the earlier stages of marriage, themes of jealousy and resentment, wanderlust, things of that nature. And if they're able to get through that and come out the other side, there's a partnership that emerges, which is a lot more akin to what people describe as, kind of a fairy tale love story, which is what we all seem to want.
Yeah, it's sort of quite an unromantic love story in the sense that we usually hear romance in stories, isn't it? But I think it's far more accurate and far more true, and actually much more romantic, really.
Exactly.
Than the sort of picture book version that you get.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that's what makes Eyes Wide Shut such a personal film. It is. It has been difficult for me to watch it compared to other Kubrick films over the years, but as I've told Stephen and my other friends who are Kubrick files, it's just more of a testament to how I revere him as a filmmaker, that he could make a film that makes me uncomfortable, and yet which I'm drawn to again and again. That's something I can't say about another director I may have admired for different or other reasons. There is something about Eyes Wide Shut that is, unsettling, and I have to trust that Stanley meant that deliberately. And it's sewn into the fabric of the story itself, so that when you sit down, you are forced to participate with it. And in that regard, it's a very engaging film, and not all films are engaging, good, bad, or otherwise.
Yeah, it's a challenging watch in its way. It's kind of got this kind of dream logic to it that it looks like a naturalistic movie, but it doesn't quite play as naturalism. You're in naturalistic settings with people who could be real, but there doesn't seem to be much attempt to kind of give them make them feel like people on the screen. I don't think we're going for kind of suggesting a sort of backstory, interior life, all that kind of thing. There's a quote from, I can't remember who said this now. Somebody was quoting him as saying, "Real is good, interesting is better."
Yes.
It was Tony Fruin, actually. It was Tony Fruin. Real is good, interesting is better, which is an unusual thing to say in the context of what is ostensibly a naturalistic film. It's a couple going about their lives and figuring out their relationship. That's that you play for realism, but that's not what he's doing, and that's can be challenging about it, but brings me back to it again. In that, why? And I still don't know, what that's doing, but I find it engaging, weirdly engaging.
Indeed. No, I think that's very well said. A couple follow-up questions. Would you, do you have rather any one particular memory that shone out to you, something that really stood out from your interviews with either Katharina or Jan or Tony, anyone else?
You know, in the context of Eyes Wide Shut, it was almost everybody that we interviewed teared up at some point in the interview. You know, we didn't always include that. That wasn't always the right moment to include in the final film. So you won't see a lot of that in the edit. But it was, you know, it was striking that, again, to quote Tony, working for Kubrick was a way of life. You know, it's very much it's not a day job to these guys, and it was a real striking sense of that from everybody who we talked to. You know, and I only talked to people who, actually, that's not strictly true. Particularly with Eyes Wide Shut, we were talking to people who lasted with him and spent a long time working with him, and you do sense there is this kind of loyalty that keeps people going, working with him for over years and over decades. And I was quite struck by that. It was not a day job to these guys.
It's fascinating. What about the University of London archives? Was there any document or any little thing that popped out?
I mean, it's this humbling experience where you're holding his annotated shooting script, like Clockwork Orange or something, and you just, it really is humbling. But I was most struck by, I think of the films I've done, the most archival in terms of Kubrick's stuff was the Shining one. And I was, you know, delighted when we was researching in the archives on that to find a script draft that he had sent back to Diane Johnson, where she had written murder backwards, but with the letter facing forwards. And he had written in the margin, he had drawn an arrow, and he'd said, wouldn't it be more like this? And he writes, red rum, as if reflected in the... So you just, you know, you see that iconic moment, and you're able to then, you know, in the edit, you're able to then cut from ideas scribbled in the margin of the page to, you know, one of the most famous shots in cinema. Or, you know, there's sequences where we could go from looking at, you know, a memo that's been scribbled to a sketch for a set to an image of the set being built to a shot from the film, and you can follow the idea through the production process or the pre-production process, which is a satisfying end-to-end journey to go on.
It's very cool. Yeah, I'm painting a picture in my imagination as you spell that out. It's really cool. Just being able to have that tactile experience with the development process. And I imagine it would be humbling for any fan of Kubrick's, but here you are, and you've gotten to work closely with the archives and again his family on 3 separate projects. Now, I wonder, since you have had the chance to speak with Katharina and Jan and Tony Fruin, as you mentioned, was there anyone that you would have liked to have talked to for this project, but unfortunately weren't able to get?
Well, I would have loved to talk to, you know, everyone involved in Eyes Wide Shut, but, you know, really I wasn't, you know, for an 8-minute film it's not possible, but I loved the Nathan Abrams and Robert Kolker book about Eyes Wide Shut, which is well worth a read, because I thought it was a cracking book on it. You know, there's a load of people talked to in there informing that book that I wasn't able to speak to. The one person I would have loved to talk to film on camera was Leon Vitali, who we spoke to him on the phone a couple of times on FaceTime and stuff, and it just never managed to make the diaries work to get him on camera and in the film. Which was a real shame, because he was very supportive of what we were doing. I would have loved to include him in it. You know, he was such a vital part of of the Kubrick operation and of that film in particular. It was a shame not to be able to have him involved.
Indeed, yeah, and his story of where he was when he got the phone call was, when we spoke with him, it was a gut punch. It's just very touching and heartfelt, poignant, but you can still hear the sense of loss in Leon's voice all these years later.
The last conversation I had was, I was parked in a supermarket car park on a Saturday afternoon, trying to cram in my shopping, which was, the same every week. I'd go, when I had an hour, I'd go and do my shopping for the week, and then what I would do is go home, take everything out of the fridge that I bought the week before, and put everything I just bought, which was the same as what was in the fridge. And, but I ended up never touching it because I was never home to eat it. But anyway, I'd actually got a couple of hours on the Saturday afternoon, and I just parked in this car park in the supermarket, and my phone went. And for 2 hours, I was standing on the sideboard of my car and just talking to him. And because he wanted me to do this, the actual script, version of what was shot, of Eyes Wide Shut,
right.
So, I would have put in, pan left and this and that and scene this and whatever it is. And we stop outside a red door, all those kind of descriptions that a script has in it, when you read it, final copy or whatever it is,
Right.
And we talked about all that. We talked a lot about, how the film was shaping up, and he was feeling very, very happy about it and what have you. And I was going to go in the next Sunday morning. That's why he was talking to me, because I was going to go in the next Sunday morning and actually start that work, translating the script into a book, a script. And like I said, we were on the phone for a couple of hours. And then just as I was going to go in the next Sunday, the day after, and that's when I got a phone call to say that, something had happened, and, and I should, maybe not delay and wait a little while before I came, which I put the phone down, immediately ordered a cab and went up there. And when I saw, I saw the ambulance out there in front of the house and some police, 2-3 police cars, I think. And then I just understood exactly what had happened, And
do you remember the last thing you said to him, and vice versa?
Oh yeah. It was when we decided I would go in at 2:00 on Sunday afternoon. And it was just like, okay, I'll see you then. And we can sit down and just sort of go through it a little more, and we can get you on your way. And and I said, okay. But the thing was, you never. Of course, there was no such thing as a last call from Stanley Kubrick, right. Because he could talk to you, and 30 seconds later he'd be ringing you again. Well, I forgot to ask you. No, but it's absolutely true. I can't tell you.
God bless him.
That's how it is. That's how all that kind of evolved and was. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And by law, you see, this is the other thing. By law, which seems a weird thing to me, but it was, by law, they had to release it officially as a press release, to Reuters by 4:00 in the afternoon on Sunday afternoon, which meant I had to sort of scramble and find out where Tom was and where Nicole was, so I could get in touch with them before they heard the news in another way.
Oh boy.
And I found Tom in Australia and Nicole in New York. And I would have thought it'd been the other way around, wouldn't you?
Right.
But there you go.
Their native territories. Oh,
yeah. So it was, and then I can honestly say I was on auto mode from then until October, when I kicked out the last print from the lab, for Turkey, which was the last release date we had for the film. And, it never really hit me until then, that's when it hit me. And that's when first time in my life I went on an antidepressant because I was depressed, not because I thought it was fun.
So, can you tell us about the re-release of Eyes Wide Shut and your accompanying short, and specifically where are they going to be screened?
Sure. So from 29th of November, the two will be playing in, UK cinemas. So BFI are doing it. A number of other sort of, more art housey repertory type cinemas will be screening it. And then the similar sort of thing happening in a handful of international territories as well.
International territories, I hope you mean United States. Are we going to get it over here?
Oh, I don't know.
Maybe
I'm
not.
going to make it happen. I'm going to try and make it happen.
That would be great.
There's not a plan to at the moment, but I think it'd be a huge shame not to.
I think you could certainly at least bring it to New York and Los Angeles. For a happy return. I think that would be... I'm suffice it to say, I think it would go over well in the big cities. I was at the premiere of Film Worker, and places like New York, where I'm nearby, and I have friends near LA. These are areas that have a large number of people who are still and always will be fascinated in Kubrickiana and his work, showings of his film. Heck, I was just at a screening of The Shining in 4K last week, and it was at like a generic chain, movie theater, an AMC movie theater, and the attendance was, pretty high for just was it a Wednesday night? I think I saw it.
It's good. That's what we like to hear.
Well, I mean, he does hold that rarefied air where there's, a never-ending interest in at least on the part of his films, at least on behalf of the general movie-going public, because I remember sitting watching The Shining and the lights came up afterwards. There were a lot of younger people there, and I'm thinking, gosh, some of these people have not, they were never alive when Stanley Kubrick was, or they were in childhood. And here they are, fascinated enough by him that they're willing to participate, with seeing The Shining on a big screen. And again, I say that's because it's another film that really requires your participation. And I mean that in the best way.
Yeah, I mean, I was 9 when Eyes Wide Shut came out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you're kind of familiar with it culturally before you're familiar with the movie itself, and then you come to it afterwards, but sort of through a lens of pop culture references, That was very much my experience of all of his movies.
Yeah, I may have told this story on the show before, but I did see it in the theater. I was set to graduate college that year, and I remember I was living in Boston, and I remember my roommate, Chris DeCellis, at the time, he said, I woke up and came down for breakfast. He said, did you hear, man? I said, what do you, he said, Kubrick died. And I was just like, I saw it in a newspaper box as I made my way over to university for the day. And it just didn't seem real. And fast forward to, I knew Eyes Wide Shut was coming out, and then to have that news blindside you. So I sat in the theater feeling a dismay that, this is it. This is the last time you're going to get to see a new Stanley Kubrick film. And again, I had very mixed feelings about it coming away from it, but it was bittersweet isn't even the right word. There was a bit of a call over my perception of it because I just couldn't see clearly. My perspective was tainted, for lack of a better word, by the fact that I had to appreciate it. This was it.
Well, it'd come out, and there was an awful lot of hype and speculation about the film, and then coming out after the news of his death, I think, looking back at it now, you can see critics and, letters written by audience members. It was difficult for people to just simply take it on its own terms. I think it was a film that was kind of coloured by the events. People's perceptions of it were coloured by the events surrounding its release. So it's quite an interesting one to be revisiting it 20 years on and looking at it again. I think it's quite, I don't know, as you say, it was divisive at the time. It's quite interesting to see how people take to it now. Particularly as the conversation, it's a film, in large part, it's a film about, masculinity, really. And the cultural conversation around that has changed a lot in 20 years, and sort of looking at it in light of Me Too, which is, very much a story about masculinity and its toxicity. It's quite an interesting movie to be thinking about in those terms.
Well, there's
not
that,
in terms,
there's that one scene where, absolutely, I do. I think that's a really interesting line of thought, given the context of what's happening in today's culture. And it immediately brought to mind the scene where Tom Cruise is walking and the kids on the street, those frat house guys, hassle him and call him faggot. And he's emasculated in that scene, and the rest of his journey involves him being more of a dominating figure in that dynamic, whereas in that moment, he's dominated.
She had a red rose in her mouth. She was doing a Mexican lap dance right in my face. I'm serious, I got scars on the back of my neck.
Hey, what team's this switch hitter playing for?
Looks like the pink team,
This
huh?
faggot.
Faggot?
Merry Christmas, Mary.
My brothers are back there. They prime cut of meat, baby.
You want to take a ride in this bike, Kelly, you stupid faggot?
Looks like we got a mood puncher going on here, huh?
Kids are standing so close. Get out.
Yeah, it's a weird moment in the movie. It's always stood out because, Tom Cruise, the actor, has always represented a certain type of machismo on screen, whether he's, everything from Taps and Top Gun, his early films, all the way to the Mission Impossible movies of late. He's, and especially in Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia, he's really playing an overbearing
part in that movie.
Overbearing alpha male, who's driven by a psychosexual bent. And to see Tom Cruise in that scene in Eyes Wide Shut, where he is emasculated, is rather jarring, to put it one way.
Well, and I guess it's like, he starts out the movie as the man of his house, and then you sort of reveal quite quickly how fragile that masculinity is, and how quickly it crumbles, and how hard he finds it to deal with the fact that it is crumbling. It doesn't take a lot. The fact that his wife has a sort of interior sex life that he doesn't have access to, it shouldn't be a revelation to anyone, but somehow that sends him spinning out for the rest of the movie. Yeah. It's interesting.
Now, and as with everything else, as pertains to Eyes Wide Shut and, Kubrick's films in general, there's always the subject of context. And I just want to read for our listeners something you said in an interview with Park Circus and have you follow up on it. You said, I think the context can be fascinating. A movie doesn't exist in a vacuum. I'm very interested in stories of people. Movies are really difficult to make, and so often the stories that you get around them are fascinating, and the characters who find themselves drawn to make films are really interesting people to tell their stories about. I think that's a really interesting quote. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Kubrick's the perfect example, really, because he's someone who occupied a completely unique position in filmmaking and in, culturally more generally. You don't get many big budget film directors with such an idiosyncratic sort of vision, which is which is striking. You know, why not? I mean, I guess it's extremely difficult to get to a position like that. I know, I'm sure there are more people who would like to be there than ever get there. So what is it about him? You know, how did he do it? Why did he do it? That sort of stuff. Which is, you know, one of the reasons that the Kubrick archive is so great, and books like the recent one on Eyes Wide Shut are so interesting, because you with Kubrick, you can do the archaeology. You know, the stuff is there; it still exists. You can kind of dig into it, and you can see his process and what he was driving at in his interactions with the people that he was working at. You know, you can working with. You can see what he was trying to achieve.
And you know, it took him a long time to achieve what he wanted to, but in the end, he felt it was his most personal film, and we have to trust that means he was satisfied with it. And we touched on this just a bit before, but I wonder why you think it took Kubrick 30 or even 40 years to put together this work that satisfied him.
It's for me, it's the question about the film. You know, it's such a particular. He takes such a particular approach to the subject matter. You know, the shoot was famously very, very long. He said he didn't only say that it was his most personal film. He also said he thought it was his best film. So, as I understand it, you've got, you know, one of the greatest American filmmakers that there's been, achieving decades worth of work with the means to reshoot as much as he needs to. It seems like, you know, that 18-month shoot, you can get a lot done in 18 months, get a lot redone in 18 months. So I think you have to say he thought it was, you know, exactly what he wanted it to be. So why is it so unusual? You know? Sometimes you can sort of, so much happens in filmmaking that you can kind of say, well, you know, sometimes what you see on screen is a result of time pressures, or it's a result of corners that have been cut, or a moment of improvisation, or a moment of inspiration, or something like that. And with Kubrick, it's a lot more methodical than that. And at this point in his career, he's got the means to go slowly and to be precise, to be exacting. And he absolutely had the inclination to be exacting. So when he does something that is such an unusual film, you got to wonder, it's interesting, why does it look like that? You know, because you can't dismiss it as being you know, coming from the circumstances of production. I think it's coming out of his head, really.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, it has to be said, at the time of the film's release in 1999, and even now, 20 years later, the film has, you know, been and remains divisive for general audiences and among Kubrick fans. Do you have thoughts after your examination of what elements in particular might make this the case?
Yeah, I think I mean, everyone's got their own take on any given film, but, you know, I was struck by that quote from Tony that I repeated to you earlier, that Kubrick's saying real is good, interesting is better. And I think when you're sort of pursuing your idea of, when somebody's pursuing their idea of what's interesting, you'll take some people along with you, but people who kind of fall by the wayside, you're not giving them much to hang on to. You know, I think had he played the thing for sort of realism, I think you'd have had a much more conventional film. Probably fewer people adoring it, but fewer people really hating it as well.
That's interesting, the way you put that. Fewer people adoring it, but fewer people hating it. You feel that would be the case 20 years on?
I don't know. I'm so interested to see what happens around the re-release. You know, because other Kubrick movies, you know, I live in London. There's a number of good repertory cinemas here, and a lot of Kubrick movies get played. You know, it's not that hard to see them on the big screen, and have another proper look at them. And there's been re-releases of so many of the films. This one isn't as old, so I don't think it's had the time to kind of settle into the public consciousness in the same way as his other films have. You know, they're all divisive at first, and then over time, almost all of them become acknowledged as masterpieces. So with Eyes Wide Shut, you haven't had that time for that consensus to form, if it will form. You know, some people are convinced that it will, some people are less sure, but I think something like a re-release like this will be an interesting moment. Certainly some of the critics writing about it in very favourable terms these days are quite often younger writers loving it, which is interesting. People who wouldn't have been there for it the first time around.
Right.
But I think it's a film that hasn't been revisited as much. It'll be interesting.
Well, time certainly.
I can never predict when I talk to people about Eyes Wide Shut. I can never predict who's going to say I love it and who's going to say I hate it. You know, often some films there are kind of, you know, there are generational splits, or there are gender splits, or, you know, kind of fairly clear cultural splits. With Eyes Wide Shut, I can't find a pattern. It seems to be a complete mix of people having strong feelings in one direction or the other.
Yeah. It's interesting because even amongst my friends, I've had that conversation, and it's funny. I never thought about it like that till you just said it now. But I have had, you know, a constant surprise from which friends said they didn't like it or which friends said that they loved it. And it's one of those movies, you know, that they'll watch again and again. Because I have had those conversations, and I'm always fascinated by which of my friends or acquaintances, even people who say, "Oh, I love that movie. That's one of my favorite movies of his." I think one of the keys to it is the title of the novella that it was based on, which translates to Dream Story. And I think if you put it in that context, you know, the version of New York that it shows you, it doesn't really look like New York, but I don't think it was really supposed to. Right.
It looks like something, and you know, a lot of the way some of the characters are speaking doesn't always feel like the way that people talk, but again, I don't think it was supposed to. I think it's got its own logic going on, its own thing going on, and I think, you know, the trick is to go with it and see where it takes you, rather than finding fault with that. I can understand why. You know, I can understand why people love it, and I can understand why people hate it. At this point, I've got kind of a weirdly detached view from the thing. I look at it almost scientifically, but I think that tends to be the difference. When people love it, they're kind of going with it and finding it sort of to be a complete whole, you know, crafted object. And those who don't like it find it to be sort of oddly unbelievable and not quite clicking for them. Right. I suspect that's got something to do with it.
Well, I think people that I can't speak for, I shouldn't try to speak for other people who have difficulty with it. I will share with you that the difficulty I have with it on a personal note comes from what you brought up earlier about jealousy. And I remember one of my first reactions to the film was this looming question that you're forced to ask yourself, or I was anyway, which is, you know, is anyone capable of really fully trusting another person implicitly and without question, without fail? Will jealousy at some point get in the way of what should otherwise be a working, loving relationship? And that's a really hard question. I mean, again, on a personal note, my parents divorced when I was a young kid, but I think a lot of children of divorce can say that those are questions that are always there, and they're difficult. And for me, it was, you know, if Stanley felt it was his best film, and I mistakenly referred to it as his most personal, it's because I think I was seeing it as the one that has the most personal affect on me, in a sense, because I still, for better or worse, am forced to view it through that prism. That you know, all Kubrick movies leave you with a question, but that's a particularly hard question. Are we able to trust one another? Where should we know to draw a line between what makes trust and what makes love? And are the two capable of intertwining in one relationship? And can that work forever? It's hard.
It's hard, and it's hard, and it matters, which I think is why it is. Yeah, I think that's why it's so personal. What the ending of the film is so perfect, I think, in that sense, that it doesn't offer you a sort of a full certainty or a kind of something, a kind of reassuring platitude about true love conquers all or whatever. It sort of lets things be ambiguous and difficult, and yet it resolves this question in the most satisfying, a conclusive lack of conclusion. It's a great ending, I think.
It definitely is. And I think it's a testament to his sense of humor that the last word of dialogue in a Stanley Kubrick film is, of course, fuck. There's something, and not to be cheeky, but there's something irreverent about that and sardonic, I think, that's uniquely Kubrick.
And something sort of profoundly Kubrick about it, in that it doesn't let you, it doesn't give you an easy answer. It kind of resists giving you an easy answer.
Right.
And the key, it's sort of, can you accept the uncertainty of it? Can you just deal with the fact that there isn't a straight answer to this, and you just need to get on with your life.
Yeah.
You need to be able to accept it. It's very Kubrick.
Right, well, can I just have spam, baked beans and spam without the spam? No! Well, why not? Because then it would just be spam, and spam.
Hey, other people have their warm-up exercises. I got mine. Okay, everyone, there you have it. Thanks for listening to another episode of Kubrick's Universe, and, of course, thanks to Matt Wells for talking with us about his latest film, Never Just a Dream, Stanley Kubrick and Eyes Wide Shut, and also to Park Circus and, of course, Warner Brothers, who provided us with the 2 trailers that we played. Man, this fucking water pipe just kicked in again. Assholes. You're not even brewing coffee. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. There's nobody in the coffee shop. They've just got machinery going. All right, there it goes. If you want to catch Eyes Wide Shut up there on the silver screen the way it was originally seen, then be sure to check out the screening dates at parkcircus.com. And hey, if you can't make it to one of these screenings of Eyes Wide Shut in the cinema, then please just, watch it at home, since it has certainly grown to also be considered another movie set at Christmas, which makes for some great holiday viewing. Kinda like Die Hard. Except it has masked orgies and no guns. Okay, maybe it's not at all like Die Hard, but you can certainly watch both movies back to back while wrapping presents, can't ya? I mean, whatever keeps the spirit of holiday movies without a Santa in them alive. Anyway, I'm just saying, Nakatomi Plaza, December 24th, 1988. Never forget. Never forget. And be sure to keep your antennas pointed our way for our end-of-year roundup. It's going to be touching down later in December. If you would like to be part of the show, If you have something you feel is interesting to say about Stanley Kubrick and or his films, then why not record your thoughts as a short audio piece and send them to us for inclusion in an upcoming show? You can easily record it on any smartphone nowadays, and then just email it to stephenrigg.skas@gmail.com. That's stephenrigg.skas@gmail. stephenrigg.skas@gmail. It really can be anything like, I like Stanley Kubrick because, or I once worked for Kubrick, or it's a crazy story but I almost met him once, or even I went to school with Stanley's dog, or I'll never forget the time Kubrick ran over my foot with his Mercedes. Hell, I don't know. Either a story from your own memory or even just think of something you want to say about our favorite filmmaker and send it our way. We'll put you on the show. Also, be sure to check out the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society on Facebook. The Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society has been connecting fans, academics, colleagues, cohorts, and comrades for over 8 years, all in the honest effort to help bring Kubrick and his art to an ever-expanding audience of fans, old and young. Go check it out.
These guys aren't scientists. They're making it up as they go along.
Okay, we're asking everyone who enjoys our shows to please give it a rating and or a review. We make this show and bring it to you out of nothing but love for Stanley Kubrick and his unfailingly passionate fans. We do it on our own time, and we do it on our own dime. So pretty please, be passionate enough to just take a moment and share your rating or review of Kubrick's universe. We care very much about bringing this show to you, doing it right, and doing justice to the legacy of our favorite filmmaker in this brave new digital world. And your support means we can keep going. Keep new content, interviews, and episodes coming. It really does matter.
It was real nice talking to you. Bye. Over and out.
It's Kubrick's universe. We just live in it.
We have taken very thorough precautions in this podcast against broadcasting anything which might only be attributed to human error.
Thank you for listening to the Stanley Kubrick podcast. Come back soon.
Signing off. Let's try and connect on Turkey Day. All right. Much love. I'm out. Bye.